Let's jump into Raindy, a minimalist chat app built with Tailwind, SQLite, Hotwire, PropShaft, and more. I think the Rails Foundation did a great job with their new guidelines, so my goal is to align my code with the latest best practices. And what's better than starting fresh with Rails and Raindy? This time, after running Rails' new Raindy-C Tailwind, I actually took the time to read what's happening during the setup. Amazing what Rails does under the hood. The Getting Started guide creates a store with products, but it's easy to substitute that with Raindy and Chats, right? Later in step 11, they add authentication. I decided to run Rails G authentication before creating the chat model to avoid needing a separate migration just to add user references to the chats table. But first, there's a little setup. My commit back then was add UUID concern and set up application.rb for ORM primary string. I'm sticking with this approach because I already used it in my Raindy sketch. That said, I really agree with Stephen Margam's take. I much prefer having the database, rather than the model, handle ID generation. Next step, authentication. Again, super interesting to see what's happening under the hood. I included the UUID concern in both the user and session models. While I was updating user.rb, I also added email validation and started thinking about how to structure my models going forward. With authentication in place, I needed a root path, so a dashboard that's automatically protected. Nice, Rails G-controller dashboard index. But before heading to the dashboard, I styled session/new.html.erb with some Tailwind classes. And then I realized, just before finally creating my chat model, where's my sign-out? How do I navigate the app? Oh boy. So, I started with a drawer, Rails G Stimulus Components drawer, pretty self-explanatory. The drawer is a dialog, so the Mozilla developer docs are a must-read. Also helpful, how to use a dropdown based on the menu bar pattern from w3.org. A great article from 260digital.com. With this knowledge, I finished the dashboard with a working drawer and a main navigation. Sign in out works, the drawer and the main navigation, aka dropdown, work too. Great. I did the mini test setup and wrote tests for drawer and dropdown, but I'll skip that step for now. But this took way longer than I expected. It's 2025 and web accessibility is in, so the keyboard navigation tests became a full-blown user story. In the end, my push passed CI, and I was ready to create the chat model. Finally, the chat model Rails G model, chat user references name string, and a scaffold for chat so that I could use it as a reference. How is the current way of structuring a controller, etc.? Rails G scaffold chat name string. This gives us everything we need and also introduces us to test-related files for the first time. Next commit, feature chat, introduce chat model, concerns, and tests. It's kind of wild, right? So much work and setup for just a few things. Authentication, session, current, user model, a dashboard, drawer and dropdown, a chat scaffold with inline edit inside the drawer, and of course, keyboard navigation for all of it. But enough setup, let's jump to the browser. The Open Drawer button in the bottom left gets focus on page load, so the user can press Enter to open the sidebar. The Close button also gets focus, and since it's a dialog, pressing Escape closes it by default. Using Tab, we navigate through the chat list. Pressing Enter triggers the link to the chat's edit view, which uses a turbo frame and replaces its content. The edit form, controlled by the chat's ChatEditController, listens for Tab, Shift-Tab, and Escape. Don't worry. We'll look at the code shortly. So yeah, these are the basic CRUD actions. I also use a small JavaScript utility to store the currently focused element, so when you close and reopen the drawer, focus is restored as expected. The main navigation in the bottom right is navigable with arrow keys. You can sign in and out again. Simple, but I like it. Speaking of the two ways to navigate the app, I hope you don't mind if we take a quick detour and look at the application.html.erb layout. I enabled the PWA manifest and created a PWA controller that uses window.matchMedia to detect whether the app is running in standalone mode. This helps with the two navigation buttons. With an additional class, we can fine-tune the layout so that, on an actual mobile device, the buttons sit a bit higher, just above the bottom edge of the screen. On the left, we see the app in Safari on an iPhone 16. On the right, the same app running standalone on an iPhone 16e. But let's jump back into the code. Since we're talking about JavaScript, let's explore that side of things a bit more. We have chat-related controllers, like the Chats List controller, which we'll look at in more detail later when we get to keyboard navigation and event dispatching. Then we have components like the drawer, which communicates with the Chats List controller. The Turbo Listener controller helps me debug all kinds of events. It's too detailed to go into right now, but there's a corresponding div with a data controller in application.html.erb, usually commented out. In ApplicationHelper.rb, there's a reload app helper that's really useful during development when running the app as a standalone PWA. There's also a check server health helper that uses the /up route to show a connection hint. I use ngrok to test the app on my devices, so this setup makes sense for me. Lastly, there's a base controller used by all other controllers. During debugging, I like being able to toggle which controllers are active. Maybe that's helpful for you too. Now, the store focus function in storagefocus.js contains an interesting note on name conversions, especially related to controllers with double dashes. But with getAttribute, we find the currently focused target and store it in session storage along with the turbo frame ID. Let's get back on track. We'll now take a look at MVC. Close the JavaScript folder for now and open the chat-related views first. There, we'll find partials, turbo streams, and all the scaffolded views. With stimulus in mind, the chat's index view, using turbo frames and stimulus-related actions and values, simply renders all chats or a hint if none exist. In create.turbostream.erb, that hint is removed after the first new chat is prepended to the div with the ID chats. In line 8, the new chat path is set as the ERC for the turbo frame, so that the related form partial form.html.erb is rendered directly in index. Both this form and the edit form include web accessibility attributes like aria and role. The chat name input has a pattern, which is defined in the chat model. The submit button uses tab index equals 0, making it keyboard accessible. There's also a validation tooltip for any backend validation errors. If I set required false and comment out the pattern, let's take a look in the browser to see how the form behaves now on chat-index. We haven't looked at the model yet, but if we try submitting an empty chat name, validations for presence and invalid characters from the HTML pattern show nicely, like the browser's default tooltips. Not super useful in practice, because with required true and a pattern, nobody will ever see these. But it was a fun little idea I had, and I built it. Back to the code. We talked about the chat's chat list controller and the no chats hint. Next up, the chat.html.erb partial. Of course, it's a turbo frame. Grin. There's a link to the chat's show view with data turbo frame equals top and a target we need for our stimulus controller. The link to the edit view uses data turbo frame with the DOM ID chat, so the edit form gets rendered in place. Since it's a link that behaves like a button, we assign it role equals button. For the delete action, we use a classic button to with data turbo confirm. The chat's chat list controller delete chat action sets focus on the previous chat link. Let me show you. We press tab, delete a chat, confirm, and the focus is restored. There's a quick visual jump I couldn't fix yet, but honestly, not important enough right now. Anyway, let's look closer at the edit form. We listen for keydown events. When leaving the input field, the @keydown.leave.prevent triggers submit edit form in our chat's ChatEditController, for example, on a mouse click outside the input. There's also a hidden submit button and a link back to the drawer list item view, which simply re-renders the chat with the correct turbo frame DOM ID chat in place. The escape key we mapped on the form just clicks this link and the turbo frame gets updated instantly. Awesome. I think that covers all the views, so it's time to take a look at the ChatsController. Nothing really exciting here, just a standard before action set chat for most of our methods. And honestly, right now while recording this, I just noticed the nearly invisible jump to view and routes links in VS Code. How blind I was before. Crazy. Anyway, current user is a private helper method in ApplicationController. I've used it for ages, especially with the devise gem. Switch locale is a copy-paste from the official Rails I18N guide on rubyonrails.org. The set variant method is from an older project where I actually used variants, so it's kind of a to-do now. I'll leave it to you to check what the current best practice is for that. Keep line 5 in mind. Include authentication. Since ChatsController inherits from ApplicationController, all chat routes are authenticated, and we use current-user.chats to load and display the chats in index. The create, update, and destroy methods respond with turbo streams, with HTML as a fallback and also for testing. If you haven't noticed by now, this project is for educational purposes and for fun, so the comment in line 70 really drives that point home. Today I discovered that Rails will automatically render erb views/chats drawer list item.html.erb. As long as the route exists, the view file is present, and @chat is set. So, the controller action was missing, and it still worked. One of my little discoveries while working on the testing user story. We'll talk more about that later. The set chat action uses params to find the chat that belongs to the current user. Otherwise, the user is redirected. We disable Rubocop for line 83. Since Rails 8, we use params.require.expect. There's a really good video from Chris Oliver, aka Exid3, explaining this. I'll link it in the description. Now, the passwords controller is unchanged. The dashboard controller only has its index view. The sessions controller and the authentication concern include some helpful comments about resetting the session and why we use permit in user params. Next up, the helpers folder. The chats helper and dashboard helper are auto-generated and currently empty. In ApplicationHelper, I've added a few Flash message-related methods. By default, Rails comes with two built-in Flash keys, Alert and Notice. A quick look at the Rails API shows we can use add Flash types to add warning and success. The Flash messages partial is included in both application.html.erb and the drawer partial. Remember, the dialog element used for the drawer creates a modal context. Everything outside becomes inert and hidden from assistive technologies. Also, nothing outside the dialog, no matter its z-index, can appear above it. With this setup, we can show messages like the updated chat name in the drawer or after signing in and out, directly in application.html.erb. We use the Flash helper here to generate the div with the appropriate classes, plus stimulus data action, data target, and data value attributes for the alert component. We'll skip the JavaScript folder for now and head over to the models folder to look at the chat model. I talked about the UUID concern in the beginning. The strict validation concern is used in line 37. It works together with those validation tooltips we saw earlier. The sanitization concern shows up in line 24. I'll leave it up to you to explore them. They're well documented. Other than that, nothing unusual here. Models, check. Views, check. Controller, check. We skipped some stimulus topics earlier. Now it's time to figure out what they're actually doing. Oops, scratch that. Let's roll back the views check to 95% checked. I totally missed the main navigation partial. It goes hand in hand with the dropdown controller, which, to be honest, is basically a drop up in my case. If I ever need a real dropdown again, I'll just add a direction modifier or something similar. In this navigation component, key down events listen for the arrow keys. The button handles the click event, and now that I look at it again, I could probably remove the explicit click action. Since it's a button, click handling is already built in and accessible. Tab index equals 0 and aria attributes? All set. The navigation list has role equals menu and the correct aria orientation. The list items themselves have tab index equals -1. They shouldn't be reachable via the tab key. Each one also has data dropdown target equals menu item, which makes them easy to manage as static targets inside the dropdown controller. Besides closing the dropdown with escape, I bind an event listener to click, triggering handle outside click. That one checks get as open to return early if needed, or uses the same close menu method that escape uses. Open menu should be readable enough and toggle as well. That just leaves focus previous item and focus next item, our arrow key handlers. Current index is determined by checking document.activeElement inside the list of all menu item targets from the controller. Then we calculate the previous or next index and focus the appropriate item. Nice and clean. Next controller, the drawer. We bind a listener to the dialog's cancel event to trigger our private method handle cancel, which then uses close. It's a promise-based function. For the sliding effect, I took inspiration from slideover.js in the Tailwind CSS stimulus components repo. We set and remove attributes, and we use dispatch in line 48 to communicate with the chat list controller. The cancelable true option isn't actively used here, but hey, good to know it exists. The open function calls showModal native to the dialog element and dispatches an event to notify that the dialog is now open. If you're going to work with the dialog element, definitely check out the Mozilla developer docs. They're a great resource. So, what is the dispatch open actually doing? Remember, in our chats index, we have the list of chats with the chat list controller and an action. Each time components drawer open is used, it dispatches a custom event to the @window, triggering the open drawer function. The cool part? We don't have to manually set up event listeners for this dispatch, like we did back in line 26. That was my first implementation, and I asked myself, isn't there a smarter way? So I checked the stimulus reference and found the section on cross-controller coordination with events, which explains how to do this cleanly using two simple controllers. I used that approach in OpenDrawer. There's still a to-do in line 23 referencing the old listener. Smile. We've got our targets defined in line 9. We also defined two values. Edit chat tracks whether the user is editing the chat name. Chat edit finished signals that editing has ended. Something I hadn't realized until working with private methods and the hash syntax in Stimulus. You can write getters and setters and call them without parentheses. Let's look at what highlight current chat does when the controller is connected. The current chat ID getter extracts the chat ID from the path. If there's none, like in the dashboard view, nothing gets highlighted. But if there is a chat ID, we loop through all chat list items, find the correct one, add a highlight class, and set area current. For all others, we remove those. Simple and effective. We talked earlier about storing and restoring focus in lines 165 and 169. Now let's scroll up to section 3, Target Lifecycle Methods. Here's Edit Chat Link Target Connected. This method runs whenever a new Edit Chat Link target is added to the DOM. Basically, whenever the edit button for a chat appears. We log a little message, just for debugging. If edit chat value is true, we're in edit mode. Then comes a neat trick. We add a short delay with set timeout. Why? Because Turbo can update the DOM so fast that delete buttons might re-enable too soon. So, the delay gives us just enough time to clean things up. We toggle off the new chat form and disable chat action buttons. Then, if chat edit finished value is true, we focus the chat detail link, so the user's attention returns to the chat they just edited. If not, we refocus the edit chat link so they can continue editing. And finally, we call highlight current chat again, just to ensure the visual state reflects what's selected. Next up, public action methods, section 4a. If the user deletes a chat, we grab the next turbo frame, find its detail link, and focus it. Now let's talk about the edit chat method. When the user clicks the edit button or presses enter while it's focused, this method runs. First, we set edit chat value to true, flipping the controller into edit mode. Then we call toggle new chat form true and toggle chat actions true. That disables the new chat form and the other chat action buttons, so the user can't start a new chat, or delete something by mistake while editing. Just a bit of UI safety, making sure their focus stays on editing that one chat. Now let's look at Shift-Tab key pressed and Tab key pressed. These are all about keyboard navigation, making the app accessible and smooth for keyboard users. When Tab or Shift-Tab is pressed, these methods fire. We log a quick debug message and store the focus. Interesting note, Stimulus supports keyup.tab and keyup.shift, but not keyupshift.tab. If you press Shift, then Tab Stimulus catches it as keyup.tab. We use that here. Good to know. You might want to look at the Hotwire Stimulus reference on keyboard event filters and modifier keys for more insights. We already talked about OpenDrawer in section 4b. The Focus Edit Chat Link and Focus Chat Detail Link methods should be self-explanatory. Now, Handle Chat Edit Finished, line 143, is back to dispatching. Our to-do in line 23 refers to this event listener. It's listening for a dispatch from the ChatEditController when editing finishes via Shift or Shift-Tab. We set the value and process it in Edit Chat Link Target Connected, like we discussed earlier. So speaking of Chat's ChatEditController, what's actually happening there? Remember the form edit partial? the name input and 2 buttons, where the cancel edit button is actually a link. And while typing this voiceover, I realized, wait, what? Is there a role equals button on that link? Found it. Fixed it. With that done, what happens when the controller connects? We set Shift-Tab, Form Submitted, and Canceled to false. I don't like how autofocus places the cursor at the beginning of the input, so when the chat name input target is connected, I set the selection range manually so that the cursor appears at the end of the chat name. The user can press Escape, and Cancel Edit clicks the target. Super easy. Detect Shift-Tab is another little todo, a leftover from before I checked the stimulus reference. If you bind keydown.shift-tab, you can remove the if clause entirely. Up to you. Anyway, this method, along with detect tab and leave input field, all trigger submit edit form. That first checks whether the name value has changed, and if it has, it calls request submit on the form. Then in line 74, we dispatch chat edit finished and pass along whether shift tab was used. This sets the chat edit finished value in the chat list controller so that focus can be correctly restored after the turbo frame is replaced, and the edit chat link target is connected again. Let's head back to the browser and use the app with all this new context in mind. A few minutes ago, I mentioned the base controller, which logs whenever a controller is connected. Here's what that looks like. All edit chat link targets are connected. I click to open the drawer. The DrawerController dispatches its event. The chat list controller receives it via open drawer, and the previously focused element is restored. I click Edit. The chat's ChatEditController, bound to our form edit partial, connects. As I move the mouse around, you'll see all the buttons are disabled and the cursor is positioned correctly. I press Escape. Under the hood, the Cancel Edit button is clicked. The turbo frame is replaced. Done. Easy. Now let's actually edit a chat name. To submit, I press the Tab key. This dispatches Chat Edit Finished. You'll see my little love and color in the logs. The chat list controller receives the info that Shift-Tab was not used. The edit chat link target is reconnected and handles focus. In my opinion, it makes sense to return focus to the edit icon instead of jumping to the trash icon, which would be the next tab stop. That said, things get trickier when the user submits the form using Shift-Tab. So let's edit the name again. Press Shift-Tab. And now, for me at least, it feels more natural to focus the chat detail link instead of the edit button. Does that make sense for you too? Leave a comment below. Back to the code. You might have noticed in the logs that the component's AlertController was connected. I think that's the last one we haven't talked about yet. A user can close the alert by clicking it, or it disappears after 8 seconds, which I defined as the alert default delay in my constants. Earlier, I mentioned the ApplicationHelper, where this delay value is used. Quick hint, I test the helper in the next screencast, where I set the delay to 1 second. Maybe I'll try 500 milliseconds, just had that thought. Anyway, validate delay might not be strictly necessary, but better safe than sorry. Announce to screen reader is currently untested. It was an AI suggestion. If any of you have experience with screen readers, I'd love to hear your feedback. What a ride, at least for me. I'm taking a sip of coffee, sitting back, and I think this is it. A simple chat app with a dashboard, main navigation, the drawer, basic CRUD actions, and full keyboard navigation. I hope you liked it. Give this a thumbs up or subscribe. I'll keep the momentum going and prep part 2, where I guide you through how I test this app. So stay tuned. Greetings from Hamburg, Andy.